Very good. Let me give it one more minute and then we're going to go. All right, we're at 10:03. I am all about honoring people's time and honoring those that show up on time. So we're going to get started. We have a jam-packed morning for you today that hopefully will be interactive and engaging if I do my job correctly. And I know that the fabulous people who are on our team and our Changemaker Fellows are going to do a great job. So this should be a good time. I usually have one rule, and it is I do this because I want everyone to participate and learn. So participation will be key throughout the process. So I look forward to having you all participating and get to know one another in the process. My name is Brenda Jimenez. I am the CEO of Mentor New York. I have been here now for about 6 or 7 years in the organization and a little over 2.5 years as the CEO for the organization. So it's a great pleasure to be with all of you and discussing something that I think is really important in the mentoring movement overall, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and the work of Dr. Tori around critical mentoring and how it's really shaped the way that we look moving forward, what DEI and belonging looks like in the mentoring movement and through the work that Mentor is doing in community. So I will get this started. So just for some grounding purposes, I always don't know where to put this box, but we'll deal with it as we go. Right, so we'll go through a little bit of some agreements and introductions this morning. I'll go through some of the core principles and approaches around the work of Dr. Tori in critical mentoring. We'll talk a little bit about intersectionality and what that means. We'll have some time for personal reflection and breakout rooms that'll both be for your processing and also some interactive activities where you'll have discussions. And then we're going to go back to the basics. As you've looked at all this information, what is it that you are trying to do? What is your why? And then we'll have the Mentor New York Changemakers Fellows, Kira and Alexis, share with us their own innovation projects that they've, or what we call innovation projects, because they're infusing this work of critical mentoring with approaches that they think are important for young people within their organizations. And they'll share with you, we've been partnering with them in the last year, and they'll share with you a little bit what they've done, what they've learned, and how they've been able to practically apply this work and these sort of intentional practices into how they're doing their work differently. And then we'll go into breakout rooms to talk about how you can start doing some of this work if you're not doing it already, enhancing that work in your own programs. And then we'll have some closing remarks by everyone. Is that a good place to be? Okay. So just to ground ourselves in some agreements that I think are critically important for everyone to know, I think it's really important to engage in this work with a humble curiosity. I know I was in a training a few months ago, and I said something about approaching things with cultural humility. And someone said, well, humility would make it seem like I don't know. And I said, no, humility means that there are things you know, but you should never assume you know it all. Because even when you know, you don't know, right? And we learn that every day just by human interactions with individuals when we make assumptions or thought we knew who they were. And I often tell people I've been married 18 years, and that doesn't mean that when I roll over, sometimes I don't look at my partner and say, do I really know that person? Right? Because it's a lifetime journey. I don't even know if I know myself, right? I remember the great African-American women who were the first dentists in the country, who said they wrote a book, and one of them was 101 years old, and someone said, what's your biggest lesson? She said, I had to wake up every morning and I still learn something new about myself at 101 years old, right? And so that's always sort of the gauge of walking with humility. One diva, one mic, please, one person speaking at a time. Everyone will get a chance, raise your hand. Lead with positive intent while recognizing other people's good intent, and knowing that good intent doesn't mean that you didn't harm by what you said. So if you feel offended, or you feel that there should be something that's corrective and you want to address it, there's this great activity. My daughter went to activism camp. Believe it or not, there are activism camps for teenagers while we were in COVID, and she did it virtually. And I loved that they had, when someone says something that may have offended you, you say something like, Kira, you said something that hurt my feelings without you knowing, because sometimes people don't know. And then Kira has to say, I'm sorry I did that. What can I do to make it better? And then that person would say, Kira, think about maybe not saying homeless people next time. Maybe think about saying people who are don't have a home at the current time, or people who are in transition, because that would make me feel more comfortable. And instead of trying to justify the behavior, what Kira would say is, thank you very much, Brenda. I will make sure moving forward to add that to my learning, right? And I thought that was so powerful, because it wasn't like, don't be offended that someone's offended, just apologize, receive what they're saying, and add it to your workbook. So even though we sometimes have good intentions and we don't mean what we say, it's an opportunity to learn. So please come with that spirit. Let me move things around. Step up and step back. Know when to say something, know when to step back, right? My grandmother always said, the most powerful word in the room is sometimes the one that's said. So exercise that when you can. Offer grace to yourself and others. I don't think I'm going to be talking about anything that's rocket science, but I am going to be talking about things that sometimes are difficult to accept and admit, especially when we're talking about our work. I love when people say, don't take things personal at work. Well, when you're in a mission-based organization, everything is personal, right? We bring that to the table. We value process over perfection, right? If you know anything about innovation and the most innovative people on the planet, they'll tell you that they go live when they know 70% of it may work. They don't go live when it's 100%, and it's because that allows for learning and adjustment. And this is true of this process as well. And engage in joy-filled expressions of inclusivity and have some fun with me this morning. Bear with me. I might pull out some cheesy stuff, but you're just gonna have to enjoy it. Because can I tell you that the one thing I've known for the last 25 years about this mentoring movement, and I have to remind adults, is that young people like to have fun. And last I remember, when y'all were young, you wanted to have fun, because some of the same tenors of resistance and independence were all stemmed through not missing a social event or being in the know or being relevant in your clothing and who you are. So please, can we have some fun and embrace sort of the work that we do in a way that's youth-centered and what we are trying to accomplish today. Fair enough? Anything else we want to add? Okay, we keep moving. Great, I see thumbs up. Thank you for interacting, and thank you for being on camera. It really does help, because it makes this hard when you're not. All right, so we're gonna start. I remember I said something about being cheesy. Okay, so hopefully I can share this and you can hear it. So please let me know if you can't hear it.
Mhm.
No, no, of course that's gonna happen. So let me go to advanced sharing options. No, I don't have dual monitors. Let me go here. This is it. Share sound is an important one. Optimize for video clip is another one. Okay. Actually, I'm going to take that out. And you should be able to see this now. So, let me move this thing out of the way. I'm so sorry that it can't be technically perfect. All right, this should work. Please let it work.
Jump in, jump out, turn yourself about. Jump in, jump out, introduce yourself. My name's Vanessa, yeah, and I'm a smart girl. Gonna be a smart girl. Woo! Every day of my life, every day of her life. Jump in, jump out, turn yourself about. Jump in, jump out, introduce yourself. Your name is yeah, and you're a gonna be a woo! Every day of your life.
Okay, if you could only imagine that when we do icebreakers as adults, we do this popcorning stuff and all that. When young people do icebreakers, they're usually fun and festive. So imagine how we're going to introduce ourselves this morning.
Jump in.
Exactly. So what we need to do this morning is talk about what we love, what we like to play, or what we enjoy. And that's how you're going to introduce yourself, with a little bit of a jump in, jump out. Okay, fair enough. So I'll start for you to be cheesy. So my name is Brenda. Yay, I love to lead. Gonna be a leader. Yeah, every day of my life. Who's next? Jump in.
I gotta think about my answers.
I'm actually going to stop sharing so that we could do it. So go for it. Who's next? Come on, we don't have all day. You got to jump in.
All right, then you're going next, Kara.
Yep, I was gonna say it's
right.
me or you.
All right, my name's Alexis. Yeah, I play to learn. Yeah, I love to learn. Yeah, every day of my life.
Jump in, jump out. Go, Kira.
My name is Kira. I like to energize.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be energetic every day of my life. Jump in, jump out. Jump in, jump out.
My name's Naomi.
Yeah.
I love Twizzlers right now. I play watching TV.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I don't know, mine is corny. Every day of my life. It's that deep.
Go ahead, jump in, jump out.
Jump in, jump out.
My name is Siobhan.
Oh, there you go, you go.
Siobhan. Your name's
My
Siobhan.
name is Siobhan.
Yeah.
I love to sing.
Yeah.
I want to sing.
Yeah.
Every day of my life. Every day
Jump
of
in,
my life.
jump
Jump
out.
out. Jump in, jump out.
My name is Hadley.
Yeah.
I love to write. I'm
Yeah.
gonna write every day of my life. Jump in, jump
Jump
out.
out. Jump in, jump out.
Jump out.
Who's next?
Yeah.
I love to learn
Yeah.
Yeah.
in my life. Jump in.
Jump in, jump out. Who's next?
I can go. My name is Laura.
Yeah.
I love to teach.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make a difference every day of my life.
Yay.
Yeah.
Jump in, jump out. Jump in. Who's
jump
next?
out.
My name is Garrett.
Yeah.
I love to mentor,
Yeah.
and I play with my dog
Yeah.
every day of my life.
Yeah. Jump in, jump out.
Jump out.
Who's next?
Jump in, jump out.
Jump out. Jump in.
Jump in,
Jump out.
Jump in.
Jump out.
Jump
Got
out.
everybody?
Go ahead, Alex.
Oh,
All right, Laura, I see you off. Go ahead, Laura, jump in.
I cannot sing because I'm in a shared space. So my name is Laura. I am from Barcelona in Spain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love to dance.
Yeah.
I'm going to dance until the end of my life.
Yeah. All right, Alex is in a shared space. What do you love to do, Alex? Throw it in the chat and we'll do it for you. Go ahead, Susan, jump in.
Jump out. Jump in. Jump out.
Jump out.
I'll jump in. My name is Erica.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love to cook and bake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though I don't do it much, I want to cook and bake every day of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jump in. Jump out.
Jump out. Go ahead, Karina.
So, my name is Karina.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to dance,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and if it was up to me, I would do it every day.
Jump in, jump out. So we have
Okay.
Alex, and he loves to help people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Likes to help people because he
Yeah.
enjoys the dogs. And he loves to be outside every day of his life.
Life.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Alex.
Woo.
We've got Susan laughing right now. Let's go. Jump in, jump out.
Jump in. Jump out.
Okay, her name is Susan. She
Yeah.
loves to collaborate.
Yeah.
She's going to build relationships every
Every
day of her life.
Like, woo!
Jump
Jump
out.
out.
Right
Jump
now,
in,
one
jump out.
more. Jump in.
Jump out. Jump in.
We can't hear you right now.
He might have spotty internet.
Okay. All right, right now, throw it in the chat and we'll sing it for you. All right. It's always hard to get adults to do this. You're overthinking it. Young people show up and they jump in and they jump out and they do it with ease. You have to get comfortable and you have to meet young people where they are so you can stay relevant, right? And so being culturally relevant is just as important. So in your neighborhood, what are young people chanting and singing and listening to? That's a really important part of this, okay? And the other part I will say is that if I hear another adult say, these kids with the social media and the TikTok and this, stop it. That is the future. Go find out what they're TikToking on, what they're talking about, what they're doing. Their activism, their voice, the way that they show up is in public for you to consume so that you can relate and connect. Start utilizing that. Age, your biases, how you feel about how things used to be are no longer important if you want to meet young people where they are. Most important thing. So when you're doing this work, have a little fun, be culturally relevant, and do as the kids do so that we can be where we need to be with them in lockstep. Fair enough? Okay, so let's talk about the core principles of critical mentoring, that being one of the first, right? Which is being youth-centric and meeting young people where they are. And so if you haven't had the chance to read Critical Mentoring, I really advise that you read Dr. Tori's work. It really is relevant and changing, but what I will do is introduce you to Dr. Tori Weiston-Serdan through her TED Talk and the concepts that we'll be delving into a little more deeper this morning. Please let me know if you don't hear, okay? Oh, and before we go, her name's Renelle. Yeah, she loves to serve. Yes, she's gonna help. Yeah, every day of her life. Yes, thank you, Renelle. Here's a little bit of a tech talk by Dr. Tori.
Just gonna have to adjust to this red circle because I'm an educator.
You guys can hear okay?
And I want to walk around and talk to each of you. Young people are everything. They are innovative, they are inquisitive, they are radical, and they are loving. Young people have so much to offer us and so much to teach. As co-founder and CEO of the Youth Mentoring Action Network, a mentoring nonprofit here in the Inland Empire, I have had ample opportunity to listen to and build alongside young people. Now, while some of these moments have been difficult and challenging, all of them have been absolutely worthwhile. Folks engaged in youth work today have a really big responsibility. There's a lot happening in our world. We are engaged in epic and real-life battles against racism, heteropatriarchy, rape culture, and so much more. If there's one thing that young people need, it is a network of support. People that can help them to process and navigate the myriad of issues that they face. Young people have an incredible opportunity to build the world anew, but they need the love, support, and dedication of critical mentors to help them do it. To say that young people face a myriad of issues, this is what I mean. These images are for young people, and some of these faces may be immediately recognizable to you. They may, in fact, help to sort of get you to understand the theme that is going to emerge here. Each of these young people have been victims of murder or assault. The first picture is of Trayvon Martin, who was 17 when he was shot and killed by a neighborhood watchman. The second picture is of Monique Tillman, who was assaulted by a mall cop when she was riding her bike through the parking lot. The third picture is of Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old who was playing in a park when he was shot and killed by a police officer. And the fourth picture is of Dejera Becton, who was pinned down and sat upon when she attended a pool party. It's important for us to say their names. What each of these young people have in common is not only that they have been victims, but that their victimhood is a result of race, class, and heteropatriarchy. So how do mentors help? I've had the opportunity to travel around the country and talk to and train mentors about these issues, and I often show them these slides. I show them these visuals with the purpose of asking them this question. If you had been a mentor to one of these young people, what kinds of conversations might you have had with them? Now, given the stories of each of these young people, that kind of question typically evokes a lot of gasps and sighs, because this is a difficult conversation to have with young people. It's a difficult conversation to have with one another. And so we often avoid these conversations in favor of our own comfort. But these are conversations that we must have if we are to equip young people with the tools that they need to make change. Critical mentoring is a powerful tool. It's a blend of critical race theory and mentoring elements that help us to focus on addressing the context that youth exist in. Critical race theory says, or we use critical race theory to discuss and engage in conversations about racism, to reject colorblindness and liberalism, and to value the narratives of marginalized people. Critical mentoring essentially says that if young people's contexts were water and air, they'd be toxic, impossible to drink, impossible to breathe. Mentoring must move to clear the water and purify the air. It is not about using mentoring to manage symptoms. It's about leveraging mentoring to address root causes. When we are engaged in youth mentoring, we are often asking young people to fix themselves. And we do that when we know full well that their contexts are toxic. Why do we ask Black youth, for example, to pull up their pants and appear more respectable when we know that Black men in suits are harassed? Why do we ask marginalized youth to engage in schools when we know that schools are often sites of trauma for young people? So critical mentoring asks mentors to consider the context that youth exist in, and to then alter their mentoring praxis to help young people to address these issues. Critical mentoring is also about being youth-centric. Now, this is not separate or neatly divorced from the idea of critically considering context. In fact, if you are a youth mentor who's working with a marginalized young person, it's your responsibility to ensure that young people who are typically without voice, power, and choice have voice, power, and choice. There are 4 elements that are involved in being youth-centric. And typically my youth co-facilitators give this slide, so I give them full credit for all of these points. Those 4 elements are recognizing that youth are capable, providing youth with a platform, passing the mic, and letting youth lead. Recognizing that youth are capable is about combating our adultism. Adultism that says that young people shouldn't have opinions and that they're not ready to lead in this way. Providing a platform is about ensuring that young people have space and place to innovate and partner with us in this work. Passing the mic is exactly that. There's a saying that you don't need to be a voice for the voiceless, just pass the mic. In the same way, we should not always have to speak on behalf of young people. We should just give them opportunities to speak for themselves. And finally, we need to let young people lead. And they should be leading in various ways. They should be running our programs. They should be running this event. They should be prepared and poised to take over our positions when we move on. And young people are more than capable. They can do it. Angela Davis said that young people should be able to see further since they are standing on our shoulders. Letting youth lead, and youth centrism in general, is not about adults disappearing or leaving the picture. As a matter of fact, one of the most important components of critical mentoring is the concept of intergenerational dialogue. I want young people to understand that mentors have what Reverend Alfonso Wyatt calls elder wisdom. We have sacred knowledge to pass down and share if only young people will listen. Mentoring is supposed to be a reciprocal process, an exchange in which mentor and protege are in this ongoing process of wokeness. There's so much work to be done in our world, and mentoring should be at the very heart of that liberation work, if only adults would be willing to make themselves more relevant. Young people deserve the best of us so that they can be better than us. Thank you.
So I guess it's fair to say that she has said it all. Yes, it's every time. So when we talk about critical mentoring and its practical use, there's a couple of things that Dr. Tori talked about that I want to highlight that I think is extremely important for you to keep in mind. The part about context, right? Where air and water, if young people's contexts were air and water, they would be too toxic for survival. And understanding that that is the place where we're in. And we know that post this pandemic, it's only gotten more toxic in so many ways, right? And so the awareness that everyone has is not, can be a great tool as far as leading the conversation, but it puts us in this very challenging place that now there is no excuse, right? To not have the conversation and not have it in a thoughtful way that really is about solution strategies versus just reacting to what's before us. We've heard a lot about critical race theory in the media lately, and there is very inaccurate perceptions of what that is. And I think that Dr. Tori very clearly defines it, right? Understanding that racism exists, that the voice of the marginalized needs to be uplifted, that stories need to be told, understanding intersectionality is a really critical part of our work. Listen, I've been in the mentoring movement for 25 years. To say that some of the practices aren't built off of white supremacy would be foolish, right? We want to talk about context. Our movement is no different than any other of the systems. And so how do we look at the traditions and norms within our movement to be able to judge the systems that we create to make them more relevant and responsive to young people as we work with them? When we talk about elevating youth voice and being youth-centric, it's really looking at young people as partners, collaborators in this work, right? The concept of saviorism, right, comes from a very adult need to think that we know best, right? And so it has racialized constructs to it, but it also has a very adult construct to it as well. And so how we engage young people, how we partner and collaborate with them is a critical part of this work. And it's very difficult because it needs you to be an active participant. When we say adults get out of the way, we don't mean get out of the room. We mean get out of the way, right? And there is a difference because there's still learning and growth that needs to happen for this young person to understand how to best do X, Y, Z. It's like when you're writing an essay, just because you understand English, you've had grammar classes and you know how to put sentences together, does not mean you know how to write the essay. The adult is there to guide you, to help you understand the framing of how to build that essay, and then ultimately trust the young person to be able to go back and use what they've learned, the grammar, the sentence structure, the sentence building, to be able to produce the essay. And we have to figure out how we play that role in every aspect of their life. And then how do we make intentional shifts, right? How do we set up programming, funding, language, marketing, so that it has these key pillars in the forefront? And look, I know the political environment we are in, and as a movement, I also know that your funders are not necessarily part of, you know, a non-adultish woke environment, right? And I know that you have people to answer to. But how do you incorporate these things so that when young people see them, they see themselves reflected? Okay. Any questions about those particular practical guides in and around the critical mentoring work that we will be engaging in moving forward? Questions? Okay. Feel free to add any questions in the chat if you have them. Yeah. Yes. I see your question about being in Virginia where you have the teacher tattle tip line and all that. I agree. And that's why it's so important for you to be able to do this work without using the words that trigger everybody, right? And I do think, and it's unfortunately a reality, I've had this conversation with other colleagues across the country. We're in New York, so I have a sense of a little more, give or take, right? Depending on who the audience is, freedom, because it's not as explicit. But there are really great ways through language, action, systems, and behaviors that you can incorporate this work to make sure it stays relevant without necessarily sounding the dog whistles where everything is shut down, because I do believe that that's a reality. And then making the decision as leaders, when do you have to sound the alarm and make it more public to engage in that conversation at a larger level. But but it is a balancing act that you all have to put forth, and I'm very aware of it. But that doesn't mean you stop making those systemic transitions in your programs and how you work with young people. Okay, so let me walk you through some of those key concepts that we were talking about that I think will be part of this work and the tenor of this work. The first is around youth centrism. And I think one of the things that's really critically important about youth voice and youth activism and youth engagement is that you have to be able to create ways where young people's voices are incorporated in your work. Young people don't want to be props. They don't want you to give them a survey that you use for 5 years to inform your work, right? It is real-time engagement. There are moments where they won't know what to do. They might be shy in doing it, but you're there to support them, to coach them, to lift them in order to be able to engage and lead in the process. Okay? There's tons of ways to engage young people and making sure that they have a voice. But if you create the space for it to happen, make sure that you're going to act on it. That there are clear roles, that there's opportunities for them to lead, to have input, and that the adults that you're working with and around you are ready for that, what that means as well, right? Because you can't have a portion of your team ready to engage in youth voice and youth power that's shared with all of you, and half of the other teams stymieing the process, because then it's not going to work. So this has to be a culture within the organization and a strategy of how it is that you're going to elevate their voices, incorporate their leadership so that they can actually support you in collaborating the execution of the program. Culturally relevant mentoring practices, right? I talked about this early on. Where are young people, and are you meeting young people where they are? And look, I'm not going to pretend that I am the most aware adult in the world, because I'm not. But I will tell you is this: the more engaged young people are with your programming, the easier it'll be to be culturally relevant in your mentoring practices, because they become the litmus test and the guide. However, that does not mean that they're the teachers. You have to learn. Cultural relevancy has to do with your ability to educate yourself in and around the cultures that each of your young people might be a part of. Are you aware of their communities, some of the cultural norms? Do you understand some of the things that they might be facing? Do you understand how they communicate and the style of communication, right? And so you don't have to be of a community to service a community, but you have to understand the communities you're servicing, and with humility, learn and be able to engage so that they can support your journey of staying culturally relevant. Okay, so they're not there to teach you. You have to be proactive in the learning, but they can partner with you to make sure that it stays relevant and significant to everyone who's participating. Then there's the intersections of mentoring, right? And the reality is that we do have best practices. There's best practices to make sure that young people stay safe, that relationships actually happen. I can't stress this enough. I say this to people often. When I'm teaching mentoring practices, it's not rocket science, but the hardest thing to do for human beings is to be consistent and intentional. And the only thing that mentoring calls for is consistency and intentionality when we're doing this work. And so how do you show up into those spaces with that in mind, right? And so there's going to be what you need to do to accomplish the things in the program, and then what you need to do to have thriving relationships. And I promise you, the relationship will drive the outcome of the program that you're trying to accomplish. right? But if you don't focus on the fostering and the practices of relationship development, coupled with the youth development practices needed, with the cultural competencies, with youth voice, it's going to be very difficult to have the desired outcomes you want, okay? And sometimes I tell people, learning happens when we're having fun and in conversation. And sometimes we get caught up in, we've got to teach this, we've got to teach this. It's like, it's okay to have fun. By the way, we do a great job of it up until kids are around 7 or 8 years old. Because the whole time that they're cute and young, everybody's having fun while they learn. And then all of a sudden we get into adult mode and structure and discipline. And I'm not saying those things are not necessary. They must be coupled with and intersected with those practices to be able to enjoy. And if you're walking into this scenario, respecting young people and not trying to fix them, then fun is not a hard thing because it's a universal thing, right? And so that's a really important part of this work as well. And then collecting community-centered and culturally relevant data. We often hear those closest to the pain have the best solutions. Don't try to go somewhere and fix something without understanding the nuances of what are around you. But yet and still, we walk into spaces with young people and think we're going to solve their problems without engaging them in that conversation. Right? And many times, not only do they have the solution, they've been working the solution. It's just they haven't had the supports that they need for the solution to actually work, right? And who's going to be the courageous adult to be able to feel and understand that nuance in that context, right? I often say to my team that you can look at a data point, but it means nothing if you don't understand what that data point means relative to that community and what's happening, right? Crime is up in this neighborhood. Okay, why? Right? And why is it that we're only having one part of the conversation? So you have to make sure you're collecting data from different places in order to understand it and in order to be able to figure out what's truly going on. I grew up in the heart of the South Bronx, and I've often said this. I grew up in the heart of the South Bronx during a time in the 90s where it was not safe to grow up in the heart of the South Bronx. But if you met me as a teenager, I would have not known the wiser because I knew what was safe in my community. I knew where the dangers lied, and I knew where the support systems were. So my perception of my neighborhood was so different than the perception of the person that I would tell my address to, and they would kind of go, ooh, there, right? And I would go, what's wrong with these people? Like, I'm surrounded by amazing human beings, right? And so you have to be very careful when you make those judgments around the data you know, and start to inquire not only what that data means, but how that data is perceived by the young people that you serve. Any questions around those core concepts? Anything anybody wants to add that they think I missed? Garrett, go for it.
No, I was just, I'm just thinking about some of the additional sources maybe you might have an idea of, because I'm really interested in like culturally relevant data. That's actually something I'm not as familiar with, although, you know, obviously I can apply what I know about being culturally relevant, but I'm just wondering in terms of beyond just speaking to the young people, what are some what might be some of those other sources you would call upon, even hearkening back to your days as a young person growing up in the South Bronx, that mentoring leaders and mentoring programs should be tapping to gather some more of that culturally relevant data to further understand the context in which our young people are growing up in and experiencing?
Yeah, that's a great question, Garrett. So I always think that there's two paradigms to this reality. Your own individual growth as a person, and then what is relevant in the field of expertise that you're working in. So personally, as an individual, as a Latina woman, I can't tell you that I know everything about the Latinx community. And just because I grew up with Black and brown folk and Asian folk all my life, I can't tell you that I know everything about them. So the first thing that I would say is go on your own personal journey, right? I remember I was with someone not too long ago and they were like, have you read the autobiography of, Frederick Douglass? And I thought, I've read stuff about Frederick Douglass, but I haven't read the whole autobiography, right? And I started to read some of it. I bought it. I have to admit, it's thick, right? And there's a lot of things going on. But every time I open that book and I'm like, today I'm going to commit to 20 pages of Frederick Douglass. There's always something that happens to me as a person as I'm reading it, right? I live in a predominantly Indian American community. And so if I want to be relevant in my neighborhood, I better start understanding the Indian American community. And so they've given me some amazing literature around what to know from a religious perspective, right? Because we have Christians, Hindus, Muslims, who knew? Right? And then from a cultural perspective, right? So when we celebrate Diwali here in the neighborhood, my kids go, right? You would have thought that being someone who dresses in their traditional attire would be offensive to them. Not at all if you do it correctly, right? They welcome that. So there's tons of things that you learn as an individual to stay culturally relevant to your surroundings relative to what that is. So I would say that's the first thing and the most important thing. The second piece that comes in the works of someone like Dr. Tori, when you're reading critical mentoring, when you're reading, literature, research that really talks about the nuances of what's happening in community, and that you're looking not only at quantitative literature, but you're looking at that qualitative storytelling in the literature as well. And so as you're doing even your own data collection and surveying of your populations within community of young people, don't just collect the check the boxes so that you have that quantitative research, but also ask those open-ended questions to better understand why they're responding that way, and you understand the nuance of the data. Okay, is that helpful? Okay, any other questions?
Just a thought. I did a critical mentoring thing the other week, and I was thinking about how people can kind of work with what they have and work backwards. So I think, we have the metrics and the measurables, and we go into a situation thinking I have to tick these boxes. But like when you read critical mentoring and Dr. Tori is talking about their wife, it's very interesting because the wife, or I can't remember the lady's name, but she kind of worked with the students and then worked backwards, drew from what was happening, and said, this is the box that we tick. So it was like a very interesting way to think about not being stifled by things that are really culturally irrelevant, things that don't make a lot of sense in terms of what they're measuring, but to take okay, well, they're learning STEM, but really, we're doing beats. But right. There's a way for me to communicate that back, that this is a STEM activity and blah, blah, blah. And I really found that kind of helpful in terms of kind of measuring the work that we're doing.
That's such a great point. You are an expert. We are smart enough to figure out how to take the work we are doing and flip it on its head so that it's relevant to everyone around the table that just gave us money to say, yes, we had the impact that you wanted us to have. It just doesn't look the way you thought it was going to look. And that's the biggest piece to get our heads out of our own way. And we're not any less guilty of it in Mentor New York, right? And I don't think being a leader of color gives you the pass to figure it out better than anyone, right? I've created programming with my staff where we thought in this idyllic intellectual way that our greatest impact would happen like this. And in real time, as no one is interested in doing it, no one wants to show up, we're like, let's do it like this, let's do it like this, right? Because what we're actually doing is adjusting to the demand and the response of what it is that we're trying to accomplish. I could tell the funder at the end of this, whatever story I need to say to correlate back to the outcomes that they wanted. But I've actually had more impact by adjusting as I go than trying to stay formulaic to what it is that I said to them. And that is a huge barrier that we have sometimes in our work. And if you want to be culturally relevant, yeah, you've got to meet young people where they are to be effective, because the only thing that should be the motivator is the transformation that you want to have in that moment with the person in front of you. And that's about them. That's not about you, right? And so the moment we make it about them, then yes, you can work backwards from that. Thank you for elevating that. That's a very important point. Anyone else? And yes, to me, the bridge is over. KRS-One. I have to tell you, you know what I learned about KRS-One? I don't know if anybody knows, but about 6-7 years ago, before the pandemic, I was talking to a friend and she's like, so I'm going to this KRS-One concert, you know, it's like open fields, whatever. I was like, oh, great. She's like, you should come with me. And I was like, oh, great. So we go, and I think I'm going to see like old heads like me. It's like, I was the oldest person there, right? Talk about, you know, what you need to know. I was like, wait a second, I'm still relevant. Like, I can rock with folks, right? So it's also this thing of you've got to be in their spaces to really understand, you know, what young people are into. Don't make any assumption about what that looks like. And the moment that you do, you're in trouble, right? Because you missed a moment and an opportunity. Any other questions? Yes, big hip hop head myself. All right, so I found this and I thought that it was really great. You know, I will tell you, I've lifted a lot of this work from my colleagues who really are experts in this. But, you know, sometimes creating these norms with your staff and your team is really important. And I think expectation setting in the cultures that you want to be in is a really important piece of this work, right? So, and reminding people, because I think that sometimes we make these small mistakes because we're not being intentional about how we show up, and that we don't hold each other accountable to these things. And one way to hold your teams accountable and the adults around you that are engaged in this way accountable to this work is by creating these norms. And I found that this was really a great tool by the Center of Courage for Courage and Renewal. And so it's like, you know, give and receive welcome, right? How do you create welcoming spaces for all? And how do you do it in a way that's relevant to the people that you're trying to welcome into your space, right? In its most extreme case, I would tell you, I've had friends who have traveled to Asian countries who have had to learn what the norms of welcoming look like, right? Where shaking the hand is not the norm, where, you know, quiet and reverence is not the norm, where speaking, you know, at a certain tone, cadence, and at a certain time, allowing your elders to go first, right? These norms that you have to engage in so that people feel welcomed and heard and respected by you as the outsider coming in or welcoming them into your space. And so the other thing about voice is about allowing the safety, the psychological safety for voice to exist, right? So this thing to offer in this circle by invitation and not demand, right? That sometimes we get frustrated when young people are quiet and they're not participating and we think it's not working. But sometimes it's just like, maybe I had a bad day. Maybe I'm observing because all my experiences when I speak up have never turned out positive. Maybe I'm assuming that you see me one way when in reality you see me as another. And so what you're doing when you invite and not demand and then nurture is allowing for psychological safety to start to engulf the space that then will give permission for the young person and the people around you to show up and share, right? So that's an important piece of this work. It's very different when you come to a training and you're expecting the professor to have expectations of your behavior, right? But it's something else when we're trying to build a relationship, because I have to respect that you're showing up to this space and that it will be symbiotic and at the pace in which you want it in, not the pace I want it in, right? And so that's an important piece. The whole fixing, saving, advising, and correcting, cut it out. I always tell people, if GPS yelled at me when I went my left instead of their left, I would have thrown the damn thing away a long time ago. The only reason she survives is because Alexis is smart enough, or Siri's smart enough and kind enough that when I make my left instead of her left, she goes, oh, Brenda, rerouting. She might be disappointed in me, but she sure as hell is not judging. She didn't yell at me. She didn't try to save me. She's not correcting me. All she said is there's another way to get to where you need to go. Let's try to get there together. And so how do we show up for young people as Siri and GPS rather than this right, wrong, correct, incorrect, advising, correct, fixing, let me save you. I think if you've seen any Marvel movie lately with a woman, the traditions of the hero saving the gal is over. Usually the gal is saving the hero. The young person is saving the hero, right? You see it all the time. And so there's a reason why the narrative has changed, okay? Speak your truth in ways that are respectful for other people's truth. And so finding that voice and that cadence. Be present when you need to be present. Look, I often have young people say nobody pays attention. Nobody really answered that question. We're just as distracted. And so when you're going to be present, be present. Learn to respond to others with honest, open questions. And then this thing about, when it gets rough, turn to wonder, right? So that journey of learning, that journey of the possibilities, I think it was so amazing to read that. And I'll share these with you because I think that these are important. Keep learning. So attend to your own inner teacher, right? How are you doing that and feeding yourself? Trust and learn from silence, right? What my grandmother always says, la mejor palabra no se dice. The best word sometimes is the one never said. Observe deep confidentiality, which is necessary. But here's where the intersectionality of what confidentiality and good practices come in. You and I both know that you're going to keep things confidential till the moment or to the extent that the young person is going to do harm or harm is being done that you must report. And that part of a relationship is being honest as to where those boundaries begin and end. And so, yes, observe deep confidentiality with boundaries, right? And know that this is all possible and this is a journey and we're not going to get it right. I think when I talk to, my white brothers and sisters, sometimes they're like, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing. You know, I don't want to do the wrong thing. And it's like, yeah, and sometimes you will. But how you respond when you do those things, how you react, how you support is what dictates what will happen next. And that's true of everybody, right? And so I just had a friend, and she's you know, a huge chief diversity officer somewhere, and she has an experience at Heathrow Airport, and her best self, her most open, educated, welcoming, inclusive self did not show up. And she had to call the thing a thing. I didn't show up the right way. They didn't show up the right way. And in not doing it, the situation went from here to here. And it is what it is. And we have to call it for what it is, accept it, learn from it, adjust, apologize, own it, and move forward, right? And those are things that we should do as adults, and then mirror so that young people can also learn, right? And that we're GPSing that. That lesson is by GPSing it, not by telling them or correcting them, or it's through the analysis of what it might have looked like had it played out differently. And that's a journey you could go on together without ever having to correct that young person in the process, right? And so employing some of those GPS skills are really important. As you know, the famous saying, nothing for us without us. And so for young people, how are we incorporating them in the work that we're doing so that it's relevant for them? Sometimes in life, you don't know what you don't know, but you definitely know what you need, even though it might not be what you want. And that's why we're always in conflict. So engaging them in the process, believe me, they'll tell you what they need. Okay? So checking in on the process. Listen to those that are going to benefit from your work. They're going to tell you if it's working, right? Build with those that are part of the work with you, and then create the space that allows those people that most will benefit from the work to be able to engage in. And I often say this, you can create spaces of joy for young people. Actually, I will say this, my mantra the last 2 years since COVID started is, if you're not creating spaces of joy for young people, you will not be effective. There are too many spaces where they have to follow rules, where they have to sit in a classroom, face forward, do this. By the way, 8 hours of a young person's life is dictated to them. They walk into a classroom, they sit down, a teacher tells them what they need to know, they read what they need to know, they spit out what they need to know, and sometimes they do that without saying one word the entire day. It's not built for that unless you have an amazing teacher who was participatory and did an activity and said, what do you think, Kira? What do you think, Erica? And how many times of a day does a teacher really have time to do that in a classroom, right? It's not a slight on the teacher, it's the system. So are they going to go into your mentoring program to hear yet another curriculum? Are they going to go into a mentoring program where they're going to be dictated to yet again? If your relationships function that way, would you want to be in a relationship? And so those are the questions that we have to ask ourselves when we talk about how do we make this youth-centric? How do you create a space of joy? How do you teach the lessons of mindfulness, of navigating challenges through critical thinking, of having them lead? You know, the number one thing I've heard from companies is, oh, these young people don't have soft skills and they need to get career ready and they need to get college ready. Well, soft skills are learned through experience. Are we providing that space? where we're interacting and talking to one another, where I might have to think about the questions I'm going to ask, where you're actually curious about my thoughts, and that you ask me for my thoughts, and then you have me act on my thoughts, right? So all those things are necessary. Questions around that?
Yeah, I actually do. Like, could you talk a little bit more about the career readiness issues that you're seeing and how to do that in a culturally relevant way?
Yes. So career readiness is always an interesting thing. So I'm going to give you some facts just in general that I think are realities. My staff has heard me talk about this often, so please forgive me. My staff is here. So here's what I know to be true. This is how you apply data to situation to cultural relevancy. So I'll give you the example. No data. Baby boomers are turning 65, 10,000 people a clip from 2011 to 2030. At 65, there are certain jobs, aviation being one of them, that forces you to retire. The average retirement age is 72. If the trend started in 2011, as of 2016, 2017, 2018, the first wave of baby boomers started to retire out of the corporate system. That's a year before the pandemic. Think about something. If you were 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, between the ages of 2018 and today, the likelihood you retired through the pandemic is probable. What the pandemic did was fast track retirement. There are not enough people in generation X, Y, millennial, Z, A, whatever, coming up to make up the population that's retiring at the rate in which they're retiring. So in the news, you started to hear about nobody wants to go back to work. Statistically, there are not enough people to fill the positions. Secondly, statistically, there's not enough people to fill the position with the expertise to fill the gaps of each of those positions. Okay? And now we're annoyed that a group of young people are coming into the workplace and they're not ready. What I would surmise to you is three things, and this is anecdotal, but I'm sure there's going to be a research study out there. I'm not sure if they're completely not ready, or they're not ready at the rate we would like them to be ready to fill the positions we're trying to create that go beyond just general systematic manual labor type positions. That's why if you go right now to Amazon, to Target, to even those places that usually don't require a high level of education, when you look at the managers and the store managers, they are very, very young, right? So they're fast tracking learning. That's called accelerated leadership development. In all the literature of accelerated leadership development, there's one factor that makes you successful: experience. It's not even education, it's experience. So when we talk about career readiness, this is about putting experience in front of young people. Your mentoring program is poised to do that. It's poised to teach them how to advocate for themselves, to create norms about how to show up in leadership, to create responsibility, to create critical thinking skills. This went wrong at the event. Let's think together how we could do it differently next time. What would you do differently if you were me? Oh, I had this challenge today at work. Why don't we all think together how we would have solved this had you been the manager, right? So that's the opportunity that mentoring and youth development programs have, unlike any other construct, is that we can start to develop those skills even within the work that we're doing with them, all the while having fun. And so that career readiness, that gap, I don't know if it's because young people are just less prepared. It's that they don't have the luxury of time that generations have had before them to make a few mistakes, have several different jobs, jump around before you have the opportunity of leading. That's one factor. The second factor has to do with culture. You have a generation of young people over the last 30 years that have understood things like mentoring, support systems, tutoring, academic tutoring, programs that they've been a part of to support their learning and their growth. And now you put me to work and you want to haze me into a culture of doing things only one way. Companies are in trouble. That doesn't work. You can give me rules. I know rules, but you can't say, well, you have to be there for 7 years before you do this position. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to learn from you, jump, and go to the company that'll let me do it in 3. Right? And so now you have less people available to work, statistically less people. It's data. And you have a generation that would like things like work-life balance, learning, growing, mentoring in the workplace. So if you don't provide those things, I have options. And young people know that. And they also have figured out over time what something is worth. So they might not have the education per se, but they know that you need something and that this might cost you X. Now, we could complain whether or not that's realistic and, you know, that's not what the market bears, but the market bears what the buyer's willing to pay. Right? And so that's what young people are doing. So that's what that looks like. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions around sort of how that looks?
I have a comment.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Back in my country, so I'm from Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes.
I am here for an internship program with Jacob A. Resettlement. And I have an issue back home where the young people are not motivated. All right. And you hear adults say this all the time. The young people are just not motivated. We're not sure what to do with the young people. So the young people are just left there to get motivation on their own. Yeah. So I'm just kind of concerned, you know, because you seem so vibrant and energetic about young people, and I love your passion. You know, it's something that I have, you know, and it's to try to, you know, create, when you say space, create space for young people to grow, to thrive, to just find themselves. I'm just curious how I can really just make that possible for young people.
Thank you for sharing that. So that's really tough, right? But I don't know how much that's built in our perception of what motivation should be. And so my first question when I hear that is, well, how are we exploring what will help them show up and be motivated? And it's going to take a minute, right? So I'm going to give you like this weird example, but you know, my youngest daughter through the pandemic has really felt it, right? She's not super extroverted because she likes her own space, but she is a socially dynamic person. And she was really like, she would tell me, I don't feel motivated. I don't feel motivated to be in school. And I would say, oh, let's go out. And she's like, I'm not motivated. Like she would use that word. It's so funny you would use that word. And last night, ironically enough, we're having this conversation. She goes, you know, she's back in school. She seems happier. And I'm like, hey, so what's going on in school that you're so like, chipper? And so she just started middle school. She goes, Mom, this thing of switching classes during the day really pumps me up. It changes my environment. I have a different teacher. It's the same group of people, but it's a different space. Changing the space motivates me to want to I mean, I could tell you, I've been picking at straws all the last 2 years to create motivation, right? Who knew? And so what I've learned in the moment that she said that, I said, oh my gosh, I am in the work and I have not taken the time to explore with her what would motivate her. I've sort of tried, but most of it was me trying to throw things at the wall and making it stick. I bet you I would have gotten to that point had I had different conversations with her, right? And I'm 100% sure that if it was someone like one of my young staff people talking to her, like Naomi here, she would have figured that out 1.5 years ago before I did, right? So you have to think, where is that perception of lack of motivation coming from? The first thing. When there's lack of motivation, sometimes there's a sense that there isn't hope. A lack of hope many times comes from not being heard or seen. How do you create some of those spaces that are relevant to young people to be heard, seen, and that empower them? And that's not an easy thing. And it's going to take a lot of trial and error and a lot of conversation. So I share that example to say, even as a parent who has my best intention, I still wasn't listening the right way. I still wasn't asking the right questions. And it took me, 2 years to find the magic button and maybe now think, well, maybe I need to change things up for her a little differently, right? Now I have to explore other things now that I found that little nugget. So it's going to be hard when you have larger groups of young people, but the power of mentoring is if you and your team or a group of volunteers target 3 or 4 young people and start doing that work while still creating a safe space and bringing them together, motivation kicks in. It takes time. But the one thing that needs to be for sure is that you're consistent and persistent. Is that helpful? Listen, trauma is real. Racialized trauma is real, and racialized trauma will keep you in bed depressed. And you have to know that that's also a real part of this work too. Okay. Any other questions?
Why did you bring up trauma-informed practice? It just came to my mind. Do you have like trainings on that? Trauma-informed practice with young people?
We do. And I think that's important to have some of that language. Yes. But what I will tell you also is this. I think that, and I think Kira can speak to this so much better just from your experience, but I do think that when it comes to young people, we have to be aware of trauma, know how to manage trauma and deal with it as it comes, but it can't be the only definition of how you move in spaces with young people, right? Like they want to see themselves as a whole person too. So it's a little bit of, it's not an and or proposition, it's about a both. You're working through that from that lens, but you're also still, there's a very human element to this, a relational piece that's fundamental that still needs to exist. Am I off, Kira? Because I'm definitely not of that ilk, so.
No, I totally agree. It's about looking at the youth from a holistic sense, really understanding that it's not all one thing, right? Like not understanding that it's not all trauma, that there are certain situations and interactions that our youth may have every day that, you know, really can affect who they are and how they show up in spaces. Again, like we are at Connections, a big part of looking at the whole child holistically and making sure that, again, we're trying to do things to nurture who they are. And a big part of what we're doing, and I'll talk about it a little later, and that will help with that, is the youth board that we're creating. So I'll definitely talk about that more too.
Yep. Yes. Garrett Spaces of Joy. I'm big on that. All right. So Youth Town Hall that Mentor had, I'll have someone on my team, Erica or Naomi, can you look this up again, the Black Youth Town Hall, if you go to mentoring.org and you search it that way, and just take the YouTube link and throw it into the chat for everyone. This is really right after George Floyd's murder. Dr. Tori and Mentor got together and hosted this panel discussion with young people, and sort of things that came out that I think were so salient and so relevant to this conversation. They don't just want a seat at the table, so don't create a youth board and just sit me there for no reason. You have to activate me. And if you don't, we'll create our own table. And they do that. And when you think about what bothers us about social media sometimes, not to harp in on it, but like to tell you, is that they created their own table with their own conversation and language, and they left all the adults out. And they were like, whatever, right? And so when you think about even some of the things that happened to our former president through social media, young people basically used a platform to voice their opinion, right? And it's like, say what you may, but that's what happened. They created their own table. We have to share power. You're not just lending me power, you're sharing it. You have to allow for them to teach you. That reverse mentoring opportunity, right? Every mentor I've met says the same thing. I've learned more from them than they've learned from me, but you have to publicly activate that. And you can no longer use us as a photo opt. If you're not doing the work, don't even try to elevate me, because I've got your number and you're out, right? And that really does impact trust, all right? Intersectionality, really quickly. I'm going to introduce this video. We are running out of time, but I'm trying to get through intersectionality. I'm going to skip some of the breakouts. I'm going to have Kira and Alexis talk, and then we'll do a final breakout, all right? So intersectionality, I will play this really quickly. This is the woman that sort of, created the term and what it means, so we could talk about it a little bit.
Welcome, Professor Kimberly Crenshaw. She is a professor of law at UCLA and Columbia University, and an expert in the fields of civil rights, Black feminist legal theory, and race, racism, and the law. On top of that, she's also the director of the Center of Intersectionality and Social Policy at Columbia University, which she co-founded in 2011, and also the co-founder of the African American Policy Forum. On top of that, she's the creator of intersectionality theory. We're so glad to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And speaking of intersectionality, that actually leads us right into our first question. For the students who may not know, what is intersectionality? Can you define that for us?
Well, I have to practice my elevator version of it, but intersectionality is basically the idea that we experience life, sometimes discrimination, sometimes benefits, based on a number of different identities that we have. So the basic term came out of a case where I was looking at Black women who were being discriminated against, not just as Black people, not just as women, but as Black women. So intersectionality was basically a metaphor to say, well, they've got race discrimination that they're facing coming from one direction, they've got gender discrimination coming from another direction, and they're colliding in their lives in ways that we don't really anticipate and understand. So intersectionality is basically meant to help people think about the fact that discrimination can happen on the basis of several different factors at the same time. And we need to have a language and ability to see it in order to address it.
I know my journey to women's and gender studies was based on intersectional factors. Like, I'm Jewish and I'm a woman, and and being raised in a Reformed Jewish family with a female rabbi was a huge it really informed my feminism. Yeah. And I was wondering, what was your journey to women's and gender studies and intersectionality?
That's a wonderful question. So I was raised by a mother and father who were deeply involved in the civil rights movement. We talked about social justice at the dinner table every day. When I came home, my friends used to tease me because I had to study for dinner. Like, my parents wanted me to talk about, what did you learn today? What did you observe today? How do you defend what you think?
No pressure.
No pressure, exactly. So that's the household that I grew up in. And my mother is what I guess in the last century, we used to call race women. They're women who were deeply committed to the idea of racial justice, and they were committed to fighting for the rights of people of color, including and especially women. So she would talk about some of the ways that racism gets experienced by Black people who are women, not just Black people who are men, and basically give me tools to see when it was coming at me. So, different ways that you might be spoken to as a Black woman as opposed to being a white woman, having to keep your eye out for harassing behavior at work. Sexual harassment actually came from Black women's employment experience. Mm-hmm. The first plaintiffs were Black women because these were kind of things that would happen to Black women in the workforce. So just the general way in which you're a woman but not quite the kind of woman that you're supposed to be. These are the kinds of things that my mom taught me about. So I had sort of a race lens from the family as a whole, and then my mother would talk more specifically about, now as a woman, these are the things that you're gonna have to look out for. So I was kind of naturally drawn by the time I got to college, both to Africana studies, which I was one of my majors, and the other major was government, and then I did a minor in women's studies.
To go back to what you said about your parents, that they were involved in the civil rights movement, and nowadays there's kind of this resurgence of Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. But the names that stand out in the Black Lives Matter movement and get the most attention are Eric Garner and Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown, but we don't see like the Yvette Smiths or the Renisha McBrides. Mm-hmm. And why do you think that is, that the Black women who are also suffering from the systemic violence are getting kind of pushed under the rug, not getting that national attention?
Yes. Well, it's an issue that I've been very much concerned with, and it was one of the reasons we started Say Her Name, to draw attention to the names that people don't have. They don't roll off the lips. We don't know, the names of Tanisha Anderson and Michelle Cusseau. I've thought a little bit about why this is the case, and I can share that we have been participating in some of the marches. We were participating, for example, in the Eric Garner March when we came up with Say Her Name, because, part of the march is you're marching and you're lifting up the names. And so then we started saying some of the women's names, and people were looking at us like, what are you talking about? And so that's why we just said, well, just say her name. You're right, just say it, because saying it brings attention to the fact that there are women who are also killed by the police. We eventually created a big banner that had the names and the photos of 20 Black women who were killed by the police. And for a while we were marching in the march with it, but we realized that actually the poster needed to be seen by people in the march. So we came out of the march and stood on the side, of the road and held up the banner so people walking by would see it. And we noticed that some people gave us the thumbs up. A lot of people were just, it didn't compute. The idea of women being killed by the police was just something they'd never imagined. Mm-hmm. And so they would come over and they took pictures and wanted to know about the stories. And then there were a few people who, were like this, right? This is not about women killed by the police. This is about Black men killed by the police. And that goes somewhat to your question. I think that there's a framing of the problem of police violence mm-hmm. that's largely influenced by an idea that this is about competing masculinities. This is about, the state, or basically some men clothed with the power of the state trying to constrain, individuals that are seen as hyper-masculine, out of control, and therefore in need of coercive punishment. Mm-hmm. And there is an element of police violence that is informed by that, but that's not the only aspect of police killings that we have to worry about. So in the same way that lynching, for example, was often framed as an assault on Black male sexuality, which many times it was also the cover for many other things that other people were subject to, including Black women who were also lynched. Mm-hmm. So we've been trying to broaden the frame so people can see how state violence is rationalized by a lot of different stereotypes. But the most important one that Black women share is that as Black people, more of a threat to the police, more likely to engage in conduct that puts police officers' lives at risk, and more in need of harsh disciplinary kind of coercive physical punishment. And we see this in cases that Black women have experienced in their homes, in their bedrooms, around the corner from where they live, in their cars, everywhere.
you kind of hinted at this, but one of the biggest critiques of Black Lives Matter is that all lives should matter. What would be your response to it?
Yeah, well, that's, the Black Lives Matter popular version of colorblindness, right? We can't speak with any particularity about the risks that certain things will happen to people who are embodied in a particular way, because to do that is to exclude all the other people, right? So, one of the most tremendously troubling things that happened after the civil rights movement is the way that some of the victories of the civil rights movement have been turned on their head. So, Brown versus Board of Education now has been twisted into an idea that it is discriminatory to take into account race at all in school assignments, even if race is being taken into account to continue the process of desegregation, right? So the idea is everybody is similarly situated with respect to race. That's part of the idea behind all lives matter. Like, everybody is similarly situated with respect to the likelihood that they'll be driving down the street one day and a police officer will, interrupt their day, and they might end up in handcuffs or worse. It just is not the case that everyone is similarly situated with respect to this. And if it were to happen to people at the same rates that it's happening to Black people, if it were to happen to white people, the responses, I think we have plenty of reason to believe, will be different. So this is all of the background that makes Black Lives Matter something to say. It's being said because the evidence suggests that they don't. So it's aspirational. Black lives should matter the same as everybody else. So just erasing what is being said by saying they all do is just denying exactly what the circumstance is, which is they're hugely different risks and circumstances of being encountered by the police. And that's what Black Lives Matter is trying to politicize.
That's great. Thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Well, thank you for the wonderful questions.
It's my pleasure. It was really,
So it's always great to see young people driving the conversation, even in that conversation. So when we talk about intersectionality, is understanding the complexity of the individual and that there's overlap, making sure that we're not leaving people out inadvertently. That's usually what happens to marginalized groups of people. And at the core of intersectionality is a simple question: what is advocating for equity without advocating for those who are most oppressed? Right? And so what I want you to do very quickly, I'm going to give you about 3 or 4 minutes to navigate this on your own, is draw a circle of yourself like this on a sheet of paper really quickly. And as you see these different dimensions, start to identify them. What's your race, ethnic background, language background, socioeconomic class? Now, then, when you were growing up, gender, sexuality, age, ability status, education. Just run through this list really quickly. And I would say that the best way to do this is to just answer it instinctually and don't overthink it. Use the words that best describe those things very quickly. And I'm going to give you about 3 or 4 minutes by the clock. Starting now, go for it. So welcome back really quickly. I know you got through some of it. I will be sharing the slides at the end of this so that you'll have some of those key slides and videos to you. So when you're thinking about this, what are 3 things you think about every day without someone asking you? You could jot them down really quickly, or you could share. Of all the things you wrote down, what are 3 things you think about every day without someone asking you?
I mean, I would say for myself, Brenda, I think it's navigating the space. As a cis woman, there was a situation last night where I had to take my dog for a walk. Usually my partner does, he's out of town. So I was like, all right, it's 11 p.m. Let me go through this. And that was something that was like a very instinctual sort of thing that I knew that I thought about, but I did it with such ease. There wasn't necessarily panic. I also think as a brown woman as well, but who's incredibly white passing, that is something that's a privilege that I navigate in understanding that. And I think also just for the job that I do, working with LGBTQ plus youth as a straight person, acknowledging that as well, of understanding of how do I show up in the space while also not telling them what their identity is or what it means, and ensuring that I'm doing this work not from a savioristic perspective, but more as a way to eliminate the burden of them needing to teach.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Really quickly. How about 3 things that you're surprised with and don't think about often? I don't think about being straight. I have to be honest with you. And I know that, you know, and I've had even this conversation with family, friends, staff, right? Like, I don't think about it. And I'm always like, you're thinking about it, don't think about it. It's like, yeah, but they have to move the earth a little differently than I do.
I was thinking about how I think a lot about, I'm a DV survivor, so I think a lot about my ex. Is he lurking? And I think a lot about custody of my daughter. I think a lot about like chronic pain, and like whether, you know, I'm gonna go to a meeting and they're gonna want to go for a walk or something like that, and how I'm going to be able to do that. And then, yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing. And I think that those things impact how you see your life, right? And how you move. We've talked a little bit about, you know, do I go out for the walk? Do I go to a meeting? Things that people take for granted, you have to think 3 or 4 times about. And so just being aware that the same way that we show up, this is how young people show up, with all those right reservations. And we were talking about creating spaces of that are safe and that are psychologically safe. How much of this, of their identity and how they show up, you know, plays into that is really important. So we're going to go back to the basics. And I think one of the things that I would love for you after this training to explore a little bit is, what is it about this work in critical mentoring? What's your why? Why is it that it is important for you to integrate these practices into your mentoring programs? What is it that is motivating you? Because I think that that's a really essential part of this work, and to keep front of mind. But what I wanted to do before our time together ended was to introduce Alexis and Kira. Alexis is a senior program manager, LGBTQ plus programming for Big Brothers Big Sisters in New York City. And Kira is a program manager at Connections Mentoring in New York City. They both have a lot of experience working with young people in the community in very different ways. And if you go into our website to volunteer opportunities, they will appear in our Change Makers Fellows section, which, by the way, a plug for next year's 2023 Change Makers Fellowship, which you should sign up to be a part of if you're not already. But I wanted to open it up first to Alexis to really talk a little bit about the work that she did. So part of being a change maker in Mentor New York was about reading critical mentoring and infusing some of those practices into the work that you're currently doing through some type of innovation. And while you're doing that implementation, our staff is working hand in hand in supporting you to be able to do that as you might need additional resources and support. So I'll open it up to Alexis, and Alexis, I have your slides. So
Thank you.
It's all you right now.
Thank you so much. Hello, good morning, everybody, or afternoon soon. My name is Alexis. I use she and her pronouns. And as Brenda beautifully articulated, which I often stumble through when I say my title out loud, is Senior Program Manager of LGBTQ+ Programming at Big Brothers Big Sisters of NYC. So we can go to the next slide. I'll speak briefly about what who Big Brothers Big Sisters is. We are the nation's first and the city's largest youth mentoring organization. We were founded in 1904. So we are really building up a 100+ foundation of a structure that, you know, was first meant to provide prevention as well as opportunity, as we believe that all youth deserve to ignite their biggest possible future through the guidance of a caring, trusting adult. We serve over 2,500 youth annually. And I would say for where I really came in is that it seemed when there was a change of CEOs in 2018, we established these 5 values as we see here. And one of them you will see is advanced diversity, equity, and inclusion. That was something that was not there prior. And that was really through the leadership of our CEO, Alicia de Rivera, was the guidance to ensure that we are recognizing and very much in the same alignment of Dr. Tori's critical mentoring book, is that we are there's nothing that we're hiding. There's not that we understand that our system is very much built on this white savioristic, white supremacist kind of structure, which very much excluded LGBTQ+ youth or queer youth to be even a part of the conversation. That was not something that folks talked about back then, not even I think 10 or 15 years ago. So what my position is, what it was meant to do, very recently added in 2021, was to establish inclusive programming that not only welcomed, I think that Brenda really talked beautifully about this. I think you can see right through a hollow or surface level commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. They not only want to be welcomed into the room, they want to be given a mic, they want to be celebrated, they don't want to be tolerated. And I think that, you know, especially when we talk about queer youth, there's often the system of like, oh, well, we accept everybody here, but it's like, okay, what are you doing to ensure that your programming is assessing the individual opportunities of these youth and not just putting it in a one-size-fits-all approach. So that is the standard of what my job is. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So in the mentorship fellowship, this was a commitment that even in the interview process, I asked, like, this is something I want to do. Do we have the budget for it? And do we want to do it? So I just wanted to make sure that it was plausible. I think to really steer away from just a welcoming or just a, you know, we all have that non-discrimination statement on our website. It can say, I think all of us now for New York, it does say gender identity, it does say sexuality, it does include them in the non-discrimination. However, we can train our volunteers to be the best that they can be. We can establish these values for ourselves internally, but we cannot guarantee or measure how our volunteers are dedicating themselves to these values when they're in a mentorship relationship. We cannot, you know, guarantee that they don't have their own implicit bias. They may say in the interview, yeah, I have no problem being matched with someone with a queer youth. I have no problem, you know, being matched with somebody who perhaps is gender non-conforming or non-binary, but then when they're in that situation, they may feel, you know, it can be completely different. So this was a way, the anti-discrimination clause was first meant to be a statement, a very explicit statement to our LGBTQ+ community members that we wanted them here, that, you know, regardless of perhaps of the way that our marketing maybe made it to look like this is really a cis environment wherever it was excluding folks from the conversation, is that we wanted you here and that we will protect you and that we understand and acknowledge that you in the world right now, there are many people saying that you don't deserve to be in these spaces. and I think really what I was saying, I think I said it wrong in terms of what Tori's what Tori beautifully eloquates in her book, but clear the air and purify the water. It was really to establish and see that yes, there's toxicity all around you, and really to purify that the best we can be, with a clause that states that we do not tolerate homophobia, we do not tolerate transphobia very explicitly. This was also meant to involving our practices to ensure that in a mentorship relationship, our matched program managers are not forced to really troubleshoot on their own. There really is lack of guidance, or we're treating this more of a passive way, but we're creating, you know, accountability, and we're assessing the individual needs of the diverse youth whom we serve, right? I can say as a cis Latina woman, my needs are going to be a lot different. It does not also speak for all the other cis Latina women out there. My experience is going to be incredibly diverse, and the needs I'm going to need are going to be incredibly diverse to the next person. So ensuring that we are not putting all the needs and the desires of queer youth in a little box and giving them a one size fits all as a band-aid when approached with a bias situation. So I would say moving forward, this started as a statement. This is what I came into with conversations with the fellows, such as with my lovely friend Kira, of just, you know, of thinking that was enough. It was then the question we were getting is like, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do when bias does come out? What are you going to do when a volunteer does say something kind of microaggressive? What is the consequence? And I was like, oh, right, yeah, we can put this type of policy, but what exactly is the implementation period? So then it was like, all right, let's think through this. It is putting that protocol, having it be guided by the child safety officer, ensuring that this initiative felt embedded by our community, as it felt like it just existed. And I'm going through this process, and I'm thinking, you know, I go to another affiliate, and I say, here we have it. And the person asks, great, have you talked to the youth council? And I said, oh, our youth council, you mean the youth in whom we try to include in all our policies? No, I have not spoken to them. They have no idea about this policy. They have no idea about what I'm doing. And I thought in that moment, here I was thinking I was spearheading this for the youth. And I think this very much goes back to just the largest message is that, you know, I can't think of the correct term right now, but just that adulterism, is that what we were saying? That sort of like adult meaning, right? It's like, oh, they're not thinking about this. There's no way that they're thinking about this. I'm sure. And I'm so like glad that was put to my attention, because here I was acting as if this was here to save them. Here I was acting as if this was not in the forefront of their brain, as if they needed me to give them the words of this type of concern. But I'm sure they're screaming in the back, begging me to give them the mic to speak about this on their own. So for what we are doing now is we are meeting with the youth council actively. It was also this thing ensuring that, you know, we're trying to get to 70%. We felt like we were 100, and now we're right now at 50, really looking at the nuances of how this policy will really enact to ensure that even if it is, you know, someone said something that may have really triggered another person and their own experience, that is treated with care and compassion, and that in the room, there can be a very clear assessment, and it's not ignored. It's not something that's glossed over. The mentor in their power, you know, dynamic is not telling the youth, oh, well, I mean, I'm sorry I hurt your feelings, but like, I didn't mean anything by it. They're holding themselves accountable to that equal value as we would want for our youth. So that is where I am in my next step. And I generally hope the next time that we meet, I'm able to give a little bit more update of where we are. But I can say that the fellowship and the critical mentoring book really helped to hold me accountable, thinking that I was being really youth centrist when I was actually, you know, thinking that having misconceptions of what the position I held was going to do.
Thank you for sharing. And now, Kira, you're going to jump in. And after Kira presents, I'll open it up to questions. So we can wrap up, and then I will leave you with some homework. Kira, you're up.
Hi, everyone. Just if you can go to the next slide. Our thing that we came up with here at Connections Mentoring. Well, actually, you know what? Before that, let me introduce myself. My name is Kira Holliday. I'm the program manager of Connections Mentoring. I've been here for about 3 years. We are currently working on a youth board. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. I'm going to go over a brief overview of our youth board. I'm going to talk about the goals that we have for this youth board, and then I'm going to talk about our next steps and what that looks like. Next slide, please. The overview of the youth board. Basically, I came into the fellowship And I wasn't sure, I knew we had to come up with something. I wasn't sure what we wanted to come up with. But after reading Dr. Tori's book, it really helped kind of create a more direct path for the thing that Connections needs to do to make sure that they would be youth-centered and we would be youth-centered. So basically what we came up with and what I came up with through attending the seminar was that we are going to create a youth board that is going to help identify intersectional issues within the youth's lives as well as within our mentoring program. The youth board is going to have 3 to 5 members that are going to be nominated by our agency and our agency partners. We thought that this was super important because I can go and I can pick any youth, but we want people who, number one, want to do this, and we want also people who are in the community to feel like these are our leaders, these are the people that we know that can speak, and the young people that we know that will drive home this mission. So again, we thought making it a community vote would be the best. We want our youth board to really help in creating relevant policy development, decision-making regarding the future and the progress of Connections. Like Brenda and like everybody has talked about, nothing about me without me. We don't feel at this point that it would be great to make decisions about policies that affect the youth without getting their input. We also, in terms of data collection, we want to involve our youth about that. I know that someone had asked earlier about data collection and what that looks like and who to involve. Well, what we're trying to do is we're trying to involve not only the youth and the young people, but we're also trying to involve and hear from their communities, their families, and to really try and get a gauge as to how we can help the youth best. And again, not only help the youth best in terms of like what that looks like in mentoring, but as Dr. Tori described, it's about helping youth challenge the status quo. We're not going to get anywhere if we're not constantly questioning whether this is right for our young people, and whether our young people are constantly questioning and evaluating. We need our young people to constantly question and evaluate what's right and what's working for them. Next slide. Oh, I actually missed the last part. That was super important. Brenda, you don't have to go back. But the other thing that we're going to have our youth do, we train all of our mentors at 3 points during their journey. After we have everything settled and our youth design this curriculum, we are actually going to have our young people train our oncoming mentors, because they are the ones that will know the best and will be able to let them know and let these adults know, hey, this is what you're going to get into. This is what it was like for me as a young person. And also, hey, this is the way that you need to come into this, right? And this is how you should solve certain issues. So we found that we feel that that's very, very important to really have our youth involved and training and really training the next level and the next group of adults that are going to really help and be agents of change with our kids. So again, overview, things that are our purposes, right? We are here to enhance the work that we already do. This youth board is there to really help just amplify Connections' message and help enhance and empower our youth. We want to also engage and have an authentic connection with everyone that we are working with on behalf of families and community partners, right? Dr. Tori talks a lot about being grassroots and being involved and enmeshed in our community. And the only way that you can do that is by really talking and having an authentic connections with the people that we work with. Because again, if we're working with our communities, we can't also be in competition with them either. So it's about making sure that we're working with in collaboration with them. We also want to empower the youth voice on how to create systemic change, dismantle systemic oppression, and again, challenge the status quo, right? These 3 things are things that really affect our youth on a daily basis. And again, the only way that we can really address those issues is by working together. We want to get like I said before, get a deeper understandings of youth issues, making sure that view that we have is authentic. And again, and that we also have credibility with our community and within the community that we serve, right? Because it could be one thing that I could say, hey, I'm serving the community. But if my community doesn't think that I'm actually doing service in the proper way, or doesn't think that I'm authentic or genuine, or if we're being altruistic about that, then what are we doing? So we definitely want to make sure that we're having that authentic and making sure that we're credible messengers. We're also trying to train future agents of change, right? We know our young people have a lot of the answers to our society's problems, right? So we're trying to train and build up these folks and build up these young people for their next steps and their next journeys. We also want to collaborate and solve problems together. You know, Dr. Tori mentioned, and a lot of the way that I was inspired by this was Dr. Tori mentioned about how with the Black Panther movement, adults and youth work together to really try and fight against systemic oppression, right? So what we're trying to do is we're going to try and mirror and model that and really try and have the young people work alongside our board to really try and solve our societal problems, or at least work on advocating in different spaces. Like, for example, like Connections, we actually have a bill on the floor that's supposed to go in January to talk about a way to help mentors get clearances. And with that, and we're going to use that connection on the floor to really try and move things forward when we can. We also want to talk about how, and use this youth board to how we can share our power with young people to solve these issues. It's, again, super, super important to have these things. Next. And our last couple goals. At Connections, we understand that critical mentoring centers on having young people work alongside adults in their communities to solve issues. This is different than before, right? Than what we've done traditionally with mentoring. We are making that intentional shift, right? Previously, it's about, you know, adults coming in and saving, but working together is really where the change is going to be. And like I mentioned before, we understand that we cannot compete with the communities that we serve. We can't profit off of the young people that we're supposed to be serving and not really engaging to help them solve the issues that plague them every day. It just doesn't work that way. So we have to, again, work in ways to address those critical needs of our youth and to not work in competition, but work in collaboration with them. Also using this youth board to help gain those professional developments. Brenda, you know, that economic speech that you just gave, again, crushed it, right? And talking about how our youth really need the experience. So this will allow our young people to have that firsthand experience. We have some of our board members who work in finance and work in other places, and we plan on giving our young people those firsthand experiences with those people so that they are able to really articulate and step into themselves. We are also talking about and figuring out how we are going to incentivize and compensate our youth for their participation, right? Knowing that our youth are credible contributors and have things that they bring, we need to, just like as adults get compensated for their image and likeness and for their ideas, our young people also need to be compensated for that too. So we are working and currently working on ways to incentivize this for our young people. And again, like, incentives look different for each person, right? We're not going to go and give out gift cards because we think that gift cards work, right? So we're exploring different things like sneakers, like trips, like experiences that will really, that we know that the youth value. Next slide. Okay, and next steps. This is a little brief timeline of kind of like the phases of where we are. The arrow right there kind of shows you where we are currently. So we definitely have a long way to go, but we are working, and actually we're working with the technical assistance folks. Erica's on the call and Karina's on the call, and they have been incredible, and really helping us build the foundation for this and really helping us work consistently through everything. So quickly, I know we only have a few more minutes, but just trying to create that foundation. Does anybody have any questions? I hope everyone saw it.
Thank you. We ran out of time. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no worries, no worries.
But it is an example of how difficult this work is, how complex it is. I think Alexa and Kira's example is about when you start to peel back that onion by doing one act, you will start to peel back the entire systemic issue that particular topic is addressing. And so you don't have to eat the entire 6-foot sandwich for change to happen. Look at that one small thing you want to change. And once you start to peel back the onion, it's going to lead you to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, so that you look at it holistically. I will open it up to questions. I know we're at time, just in case anybody wants to chime in with any questions either to myself, Kira, or Alexis. Thank you, Kira and Alexis, for the time and being here with us today. If not, what I will promise is this. For the people who were on the call, I will share some of the slides just so you have links and points of reference around the work. We will also send out to you, Naomi and Erica, if Kira and Alexis don't mind, my Kira and Alexis's email, just in case people have questions as follow-up. Yep. And that's all. That's all I have for all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that the 2 hours were worth the while. I know people had to drop off, but Karina, Raynell, Sharon, you stayed on. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for all of the insights, and we really appreciate all the content you shared. It was just amazing. Thank you.
Great. Glad we could help.
Thank you
Take
so
care,
much.
everybody. Have a good one.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Brenda. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Should we stay?
Yeah, can
Stop the recording.
stop recording, yeah.